Simon says, as a company, don't commit self-sabotage. Hello again, everyone. I'm Eli's dad with Project Eli, where we educate, we lead, and we inspire. We're continuing in our series based upon the wisdom of Simon Sinek, someone with whom I've had a bromance for several years, reading his books, watching his videos, hearing him speak, so on. And most of these ideas I already knew, but he expresses them with such a clarity that I wanted to share his perspective and pass along some of his wisdom. So what are some of the classic mistakes companies and organizations make that lead to unwittingly committing self-sabotage? The primary mistake is not actively and purposefully and consciously developing leaders. You see, there's the definition of, what is the definition of the word leader? Well, people think that leadership happens as you gain rank. Nothing is further from the truth. Leadership is a practice, and leadership is a choice. It is the choice to look after those that are around us. There are many people that sit at the highest level of organizations that have authority, but they're not leaders. We do as they tell us because they have authority over us, but we don't want to follow them. You see, one of the biggest failings in many organizations is that we don't teach people leadership. It's a skill. It requires education. Some people have natural ability, just as some people are natural athletes. Just as parenting is a skill, leadership is a skill, and you need to work on it to become great at it. When someone is junior in a company, we give them training on how to do the job. Lots of training. Here's how we do it in our system. In fact, some people get degrees in how to do the job. If you're good at doing the job, because when you're junior, your only responsibility is to do the job, and when you're good at doing the job, we're going to promote you. And if you continue to do the job, we'll continue to promote you until you get to the point where you are now in a position where you're going to be responsible for the people that do the job that you used to do. The reason these people who have the opportunity become leaders, become managers, is because now they have made this transition. They're no longer responsible for doing the job, but they're responsible for others that are doing the job, but we don't teach them how to do that. We just expect that they're good at it, and that's unfair. They're set up for failure. You know, there's a fascinating transition that people have to make. This is the genesis of a phenomenon first identified by something called the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle is a concept in management developed by Lawrence J. Peter, which observes that people in a hierarchy tend to rise to their level of incompetence. Employees are promoted based upon their success in previous jobs until they reach a level at which they're no longer competent, as skills in one job do not necessarily translate to the other job. The concept was explained in a book in 1969 called The Peter Principle by Dr. Peter and a gentleman named Raymond Hull. The book originally was intended as a satire on organizational failure, but, as is often the case, many a truth is said in jest. The transition is that we're no longer responsible for the work. We are now responsible for the people that are responsible for the work and the results. And we don't teach people who are responsible for that transition, and we don't give them the skill set as they make their way higher and higher up the ranks. The end result is that you end up with a CEO who will say, you know, my number one responsibility is the results. But they're not on the front lines. Their chief responsibility is really personnel development. The higher you advance in an organization, the truer this mantra must become. And because we at Project Eli are a channel of blueprints, of how-tos, of what to do, how to do it, and most importantly, why we do it. By the way, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Simon Sinek's Golden Circle? We're going to talk to you about how to do it. Here's one company I worked with that did it the right way. When I was working with a company with my main mentor, Mr. Bob Anderson, we always had in our schedule leaders meetings. I know other companies, they have meetings for this and meetings for that, but we would have a leaders meeting at least 2 or 3 times a week that was scheduled to happen. And what would go on in those meetings is we talk about, okay, how are we doing? We having any issues here? We having any issues there? And so on and so forth. But for me, the highlight was always to go over scenarios that are possibilities and how would we as managers, as leaders, handle those particular issues. We would sit down and Mr. Anderson, or later on me, would speak to the group and say, okay, here's your scenario. You have a guy that comes in, he's your top producer, and he refuses to go to the general meeting that we have and counts upon the fact that he's a good producer to allow us to give him that leeway. How do you handle that situation? And then we would go over, we'd have, all right, Fred, you start, how would you handle that situation? Doris, how would you handle that situation? And as the leader, I would sit there and I would listen to what it was they suggested. And many times when they would do that, you would get a unique perspective on how to handle the situation and add to the knowledge that you already had. So not only was it a teaching experience for you as a leader, but it was also a learning experience, because these are people, once again, remember, you promoted them into positions of leadership, so they have something on the ball, and they all come from unique backgrounds. How would they handle it? You can't figure all of the different scenarios that they've gone through in their lifetime, so you always want to sit down and listen to what these people have to say, and then you'll find things, of course, that they're doing that are not correct, and you want to correct them. But you listen and you get new ideas. So it was a tremendously good brainstorming session, and it was good training, and you always did it in the form of a role play. You never say, well, I would say this or I would say that. You would say, okay, you're the leader, how would you handle that situation? One of my favorites that I use very often was when we'd have a problem with a particular individual, a challenge, you'd call somebody into the office and you'd say, okay, Fred, sit down in the seat, and then you'd say, you know what, I have an issue. And then what you would do as the leader is you would describe that issue to the individual. Of course, the issue that you're describing is the very issue that you called them into your office to discuss. You say, I'm having an issue with that. I need your help. Why don't we switch seats? So you would have Fred or Doris or whoever it was sit in, behind the desk, and you would sit in where they were sitting and say, okay, how would you handle that situation? Many times you would get the problem solved just as easily as that. But there were many, many different issues that could come up, and you as someone with experience and talking to other managers in the company, we'd share, I've had this issue, that issue, how would you solve this, what would you do there, how did you do this? And so you're listening all the time, and you're getting people to think like a leader. So in the company that I worked with that gave me the biggest amount of growth that I had in my life, there was actual leadership training. How many companies out there not only don't have leadership training, but they just expect you, because you're good at doing something, to be able to transfer that to a position of leadership? It's unfair. You can't expect people to do that. You have to teach them. You have to teach them. Does that make sense? And that is how companies self-sabotage, because they do not prepare leaders for the position. And you'll have a company that's very successful with a very successful leader, and that particular leader will retire, let's say, or for whatever reason is no longer in the position of leadership. You have new people take over, and because they were not trained in leadership skills, what happens? The company starts to go downhill, and it doesn't take very long for it to happen. You see it with companies. You know, one of the leaders that was put up on a pedestal was a gentleman named Jack Welch, who was the leader of GE. Books are written, he's great, he does this, so on and so forth. Great leader. And then when he left the company, they needed a bailout from the government. The company was going so well. What the heck happened? Leadership development. Remember, as the owner of your own business, always develop leaders. If you don't have someone that's qualified, pick someone and start working with them. And when somebody else shows that they're worthy, put them in there. If that person shows that they're not worthy, get them out. Always remember that the leadership meeting, that's a privilege. That's something that my people always look forward to. That's something that I always look forward to. Why? Because we're special. We're the leaders. We're learning. We're teaching. We're developing. Remember, don't ration that passion, fashion the passion. I'm Eli's dad.